What you know, Alibis? Welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. It's Monday, July 28th. Hope you guys had a good day. First off, sorry about uploading the wrong audio file for last night's episode. Kept it on there all night long. It was actually a victim impact statement from Lori Daybell's trial. Thanks to everybody who inboxed me and said, girl, you got it wrong. So if you haven't been back, the correct episode is up now. I thought today we would take a little break from the documents and look at what's been said by law enforcement as well as Prosecutor Bill Thompson now that the gag order's been lifted. ABC News talked with Idaho State Police lead detective Lieutenant Gilbertson and Prosecutor Bill Thompson. This was posted on July 25th. The common rooms on the second floor had no trail of blood and no indication of a crime. And aside from the rooms where the murders happened, the house looked like what you would expect from a house full of college kids. Just a trigger warning, they did confirm that the blood that was seen on the outside of the house on the foundation was Ethan's. Moscow lead detective Brett Payne immediately noticed the knife sheath. They still don't know which victim was the intended target and haven't found a single link between the victims and BK. Prosecutor Thompson theorizes Kaylee or Maddie was the target. He said the fact they found them together, whether that was planned, we'll never know. It's more likely than not that BK did not expect to encounter Xana and the others up and about. He said, we're fortunate that he got scared and ran and left without harming Dylan or Bethany. Dylan was so vulnerable. That young woman had an angel watching over her. Gilbertson said once they had his name, they figured out everything about him, his life, his behaviors, his routines, from both his phone usage to his financials. And he said all of that tells a story. BK's phone was pinged near the victim's residence numerous times before the murders, as far back as August of 2022. And except for one time, all of the visits were late at night or very early in the morning. Gilbertson said up until November 13th, there were regular visits to Moscow. And kind of everywhere you would think somebody that lives in Moscow or Pullman would be back and forth. But it all stopped after November 13th. Gilbertson's theory on why BK went back to the crime scene between 9:12 and 9:21 a.m. was curiosity. He said, I think he had to be wondering, why is nothing happening? Why is there no news? Why is there nothing? Why are the police not here? Why am I not hearing anything about this? But his phone never came to Moscow again. After the murders, nothing. Once he was identified as a suspect, they found he would often wear gloves in public, like to the pharmacy. Shortly before his arrest on December 30th, 2022, it looked like he was sorting through garbage with gloves on. After his arrest, Gilbertson was one of the detectives who interviewed him. And he said, we started with just very general questions about Pullman, about WSU. He spoke at length about that with us. He said he did not follow WSU football much, but was a baseball fan. He did ask several times why he was being interviewed. Gilbertson eventually told him, we're here because of the case in Moscow. As soon as we mentioned that, then he stopped and he said, I don't want to talk anymore. We asked if he was familiar with it, if he knew anything about Moscow, and he said no, and stopped right then and said he wanted an attorney. Prosecutor Thompson talked about the plea deal and said, I respect and recognize that not everybody agrees with the decision we made. We considered what all the families had to say before we decided to make the resolution that we did. They were heard. He said it was the best closure we could hope for because we got what we wanted and we got what the law was going to provide. We got guilty pleas. We had something that a trial would have never given us or the community or the families. We had his sworn acknowledgement that the charges are true. That never would have occurred after a trial. If he would have been found guilty, we would have been engaged in literally decades of appeals with him maintaining his innocence. We have the closure of avoiding those appeals, and we have certainty. When asked why he didn't press for a full confession, he said there was no legal way we could have compelled those, and quite frankly, there's nothing he could have said that I think would have been credible or believable. He's manipulative. The misstatements, the mistruths would have been even more damaging and frustrating to everybody. This murderer is now in the custody of the Department of Corrections. That door is closed behind him, and it's not going to open again until he's dead. Prosecutor Thompson said that when Dylan was giving her victim impact statement, she sat at the prosecution table and he intentionally leaned forward to block her and BK from seeing each other, even though they were only a few feet away. He told NBC, "I've been asked to block his view of her, so she made her statements at the court. That was something I've never experienced before, but watching the strength of that young lady describing not only what happened that night, but what her life has been, the hell her life has been since then. A 19-year-old girl having to live through this, and for her to come out with so much strength and so much class, pretty darn impressive." Speaking of the plea deal, we know they were approached by BK's team. And the prosecutor said up to that point, the defense had maintained consistently that they believed their client was factually innocent of the charges, so there was nothing to discuss. We were simply preparing for trial. We made a proposal on our terms, not his. We told his lawyers the only possible resolution short of going to trial is for him to plead guilty as charged and to waive his appeals, and that we would be seeking fixed consecutive life sentences. That's the discussion we had, and they took that back to their client, came back to us, and said he is prepared to plead guilty. Speaking of Kaylee telling others someone was watching her, he said having people out and about in the neighborhood isn't going to be unusual. I think the roommates and Kaylee's sense that something was amiss was probably accurate, but I don't think we can do anything more than just recognize that. As far as BK ever telling his story, the prosecutor said he doesn't care if BK chooses to tell his story from prison one day, either to the media or through a book or any other public forum. He said, "I say that not to be cavalier, because I will feel for the families if he tries to write a book and profit off of it. And there are laws in Idaho that we can use to help control that. And we've already had these discussions with the families. My preference is that he just disappears into the Idaho Department of Corrections." Lieutenant Gilbertson and Moscow Police Chief Anthony Dollinger spoke to CNN's Gene Casares about BK's active phone. Gilbertson said it matched up with a lot of what they already had as far as activity and phone usage. When they did the extraction of the phone, they did not gain a lot from it, but they also knew he was using VPNs and wiping his phone. They did find screenshots and pictures of news coverage about the murders. He asked if it was true BK had photos of Maddie or Kaylee on his phone. He said there was no truth to that, and to this day, they've never found a single connection between BK and any of the victims. He said they were getting tips from people saying BK was following some of the victims on social media, and the tips were either determined to be not true, but also some of the photos shared with them were faked. They were made up by people. But he said they still had to research that to make sure it wasn't the case. He said some of this false information spread to the media that there was a connection between BK and the victims, but that wasn't the case. They talk about Xana's 50-plus stab wounds, and most of them being defensive. Police Chief Dollinger said she fought. She fought back, and she fought hard. And that's primarily the reason she had so many stab wounds. Gilbertson said they knew Xana was awake because she had just gotten her DoorDash order shortly before. He said between BK and Xana, that fight just continued. They believed there was one primary weapon used to kill all four. And as we've heard, Kaylee had these unique marks around her mouth area. They don't think it was from a fist. A fist could have been part of it, but the marks are not consistent with a fist. And one thing they do know is that these marks were not from a knife, but otherwise they have no clue what caused these unique patterned marks around Kaylee's mouth. They did say there was no evidence she was bound or gagged. The selfie by BK taken hours after this happened, the chief said that there are a lot of strange things about him, his demeanor, how his brain works. But Lieutenant Gilbertson said there were many other selfies of him where he had a similar pose. He said you could make lots of speculation based on the timing of that one just hours after the murders. When asked if they thought he had committed other murders before November 13th, Gilbertson says no. There's been nothing found that would indicate that, and they don't believe that he ever killed before. They think these were his first murders. When asked about their working theory on why he did what he did, Gilbert says oftentimes we just don't get the why. The why from him may make no sense to us or even be understandable. When he was a graduate student in Pennsylvania, he did that questionnaire that he sent to convicted murderers around the country about their mindset before, during, and after the murders. Gilbertson said he's very consumed with it, and they looked into all that. They have every project, every course he took. But they also said anyone else in those fields are doing similar type projects, and they found that many other students were doing the same. It's hard not to look at that as part of the why, but it's just speculation and assumptions. They're asked if the Department of Justice has reached out for any of their files since BK traveled from Washington to Idaho to commit the murders, ordered that knife on Amazon, which is interstate commerce, and there are federal crimes in both of these areas. Dollinger said so far they have heard nothing from the Department of Justice. He did point out that the FBI was an amazing resource for them and opened anything they needed. And he said the FBI was very fast to get the name through the genetic genealogy. He said it was an incredible moment for investigators. They got a call that evening, said, "We have a name," and gave it to him. Gilbertson said it was surreal to have a name, and from there, they start diving into who BK is. He said he finds genetic genealogy indispensable. They're solving cold case crimes that are 40 and 50 years old and also helping cases that are new like this one. Anjanette Levy talked to Chief Fry on Crime Fix. He said he did not go into the house. It was not his role at the time as chief, but he has seen photos and said they are horrific. Once BK was identified as the suspect, Police Chief Fry wanted to meet with Washington State University Police Chief Jenkins, who previously was with the Pullman Police Department. When Jenkins learned the name of the suspect, he said the hair on the back of his neck stood up because BK had interviewed with him in the spring of 2022 about a possible internship position with the Pullman Police Department. CNN interviewed Idaho State Police Lieutenant Darren Gilbertson and Moscow Police Chief Anthony Dollinger. After the murders, BK stopped using his debit and credit cards and started using only cash. And also, in video and surveillance they would collect and pick up after the murders, he's often wearing gloves. An inmate who was next door to BK in the county jail said that he was the smartest inmate he's ever been in with. He said BK washed his hands dozens of times each day and would spend up to an hour taking a shower. He stayed awake at night mostly and would move around his cell, which the inmate found annoying. He napped most of the day and then would talk to his mother for hours on video calls. He recalled one time the inmate was watching sports and said, "You suck." BK got angry, stuck his face aggressively through the bars, and asked if he was talking about him or his mom. In a filing by the judge, when he gave his ruling, BK was going to go the route that the killer or killers were close to the victims. In Judge Hippler's filing denying this, he said the ones BK wanted to accuse were each socially connected to one or more of the victims, interacted with one or more of the victims at social events in the hours prior to the homicides, lived within walking distance of the crime scene, and was familiar with the layout of the victim's home from prior social events. He also mentioned a fourth potential alternate perpetrator who only knew one of the victims in passing around 5 weeks before the murder. Hippler's order explained he followed her briefly out of the exit of the store while considering approaching talking to her. He turned away before even speaking to her. We know this motion was denied, and at that point, the defense had exhausted every option to get the death penalty off the table. Chief Fry said that that's a common thing to make these filings just to see if anything would stick. And once everything was denied, it's like, this is really happening. I don't want the death penalty. So he theorizes that could be why BK pleaded guilty. Kaylee's sister, who gave the victim impact statement, said she was prepared to be arrested that day at BK's sentencing. She said, "I think that every single one of us were." She also said she was fueled by the rage on his face as she gave her statement. She said, "Man, he was mad. That was obviously a big point of why I did what I did, to make him feel small because he is." It actually makes me really emotional. I got up there knowing that my speech wasn't to Kaylee or Maddie. It was for them. I had one shot at it, and I was going to make the most of it. She told News Nation that speaking to him was like being face to face with an alien. She said, I'm not intimidated by him. Truly, I'm not. But there is a primal sense of alarm, like my body was telling me, run, get out. This is a threat. So that was just a few of the things I found watching and listening to law enforcement, the prosecutors, now that they can talk. But tomorrow we will dive back into these documents. But that's it for today. I hope you guys have a good rest of your evening, and we will see you soon.